Welcome to the On Your Mind podcast, where we are changing the mental health narrative, bringing hope and solutions. Here's your host, Timothy J. Hayes, psychologist.
Joshua Cameron is an elite master healer who has learned to heal his own childhood trauma, as well as his post-traumatic stress disorder from his times at war. Joshua has a unique way of combining ancient wisdom with modern science and philosophy to make spirituality digestible and understandable. Well, Joshua, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Hey, my pleasure. I really appreciate you holding space.
I was hoping you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you got into the work you do and what drives your passion for it.
That's a great question. What drives my passion really, is probably what drives a lot of people's passion, right? When you look back to, how they were raised, in this case, how I was raised, right? I was raised in a, household that really didn't have a lot of love, right? Very dysfunctional, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of, emotional and physical abuse. And that threw me off my path for a long time. It, made me feel like, there was something wrong with me. Anytime that I would come up with a great idea, or maybe I was even inquired as to, hey, Josh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, oh my gosh, I want to be, X, Y, or Z. And like, that's stupid. Why would you do that? Don't you think that you should do, what I think that you should do? And what that ended up doing is it had me collect a lot of evidence of like, oh, well, everything that comes from within, when I measure it against, the advice that I get from people who I look up to, right? Maybe that's family, maybe those are friends, maybe, colleagues, whatever. Well, then I am left with, again, the evidence that, oh, well, that's stupid. So my intuition, I kind of blocked out. And that led me to making life a lot harder. I couldn't help but want to help, help people out. Couldn't help but want to give back to my community. And, that led to a lot of volunteerism. That led to, starting in the Army, I guess, technically at 19. And, I went to my first war zone 8 days after September 11th. And then later in 2003, went to Iraq. And so that stayed with me a lot, Kuwait and Iraq. And, working for a hospital much later on, in pediatrics, I worked in pediatric medical research and then data analytics, and the pandemic happened. And I was hired for the job to do, data analytics and business forecasting for, the entire, pediatric outpatient network for all the tertiary clinics, the neurologists, cardiologists, et cetera. And man, I was like, man, I feel so good. I'm helping people, so I'm on this spiritual path. But then when the pandemic happened, it was like, it burst my little bubble, right? It uprooted my anchor, and it showed me just how political our hospital system really is, and made me sad. But then it gave me the awareness like, oh, well, if this isn't in line with my truth, well, what is? And when I started exploring that, opportunities started arising for me to take action and learn how to not just deal with my trauma, not just, quote unquote, overcome my trauma, but to heal it, to go back to, where, I look at trauma as a way of assessing, programming. And, when a traumatic event happens, usually that's a violation of our model of the world. And it's so violating that we really don't know how to deal with it. And it kind of breaks the computer code, so to speak. And so I've learned how to go back to that part of myself that may have been stuck in time, maybe what shamans call a soul retrieval, or, just where the coding started corrupting. You just went back and almost did a patch, right, on that coding. I think is a good way to look at that. And I realized that made my life better because it allowed me to receive the world much more welcomingly. I received the world as it was, and I didn't feel this incessant need to imprint upon the world who I thought I was. I could actually discover who I was because my brain was so full of noise, was so full of what other people thought, because again, I tuned out my intuition. And I learned to quiet the noise, right? And a big part of that really was understanding, again, the data analysis I was doing, right? Anyone who's dealt with data analysis, you got to quiet the noise to increase the signal. And so I learned to quiet the noise of the brain to increase the signal of the heart. And I found that whenever I would interact with people, I couldn't help but send them away with a smile, which sent me away with a smile. And that really just got me into, headlong deep into, hey, I want to serve at a higher level. And when we open ourselves up to these truths, right, who we really are, and then we start asking ourselves questions. And a big question for me was, is there room for God in my life? And not necessarily a Christian God, not necessarily a God that anyone would say, hey, this is the God from this, holy book, and you have to believe this. But is there room for God in my life? And what would that be? And it opened a path for me. And it opened a path for me to explore consciousness, neuroscience, physics, and it's the deepest level that I've, up to that point, never journeyed into. And then it led me to being able to heal myself, which then allowed me to then start healing others. And again, sending people away with a smile and just wanting to add value to the world wherever I go. Seeing somebody who's just stuck and traumatized, and being able to help show them the same tool set that I was given, and to have them walk away and step into their fullest greatness. I mean, I just don't know that there's a greater gift that I could give somebody.
So what is the tool set that you reference?
Well, part of it is by understanding that everything that you and I before this were talking about, Anil Seth, and I think that he talks about controlled hallucinations are our perception. And I think it's good for us to understand that there's 7 billion people on the planet, and there's 7 billion different perceptions, right? There's 7 different billion, models of the world. And so the best thing for us to do is to create a model of the world that serves us, right? And create a map, right? And we don't need to mistake the map for the territory, but the map allows us to travel through the territory, like a GPS, or, actually through like an old atlas, like, we used to have. And part of it is understanding everything is energy, right? If we go back to, say, Max Planck, with in a contemporary of Einstein, talks about how consciousness is primary, right? Consciousness is everything. This is something that mystics have been talking about for thousands of years. And when we, like what I was doing, start stifling our inner voice, well, it creates blocks in that flow. And when we create blocks in that flow, well, if all energy needs to flow, well, what happens when it quits flowing? Well, let's look at water. What happens when water quits flowing? Well, it stagnates. What happens when water stagnates? Well, it attracts mosquitoes, parasites. And there's the idea in the Kabbalion, as above, so below, as below, so above, right? So we can look at the model of the world that we have here in 3D model reality and have a conceptualization of what happens at higher levels, right? There is the idea of a thought virus, right? Or a thought parasite. And you can, without getting too controversial, you can test the thought virus and see, how it has a hold of somebody. Just walk into a room full of people and say a couple of names. You could say Hillary Clinton. You could say Donald Trump. You could say Barack Obama, and just see what people do. And people will go from having a very wonderful conversation to just inciting anger, rage, even in some cases. And so teach people that these parasites, right, as we, if we don't protect our energy, and we don't, follow who we truly are, we listen to what other people have to give us, well, we start blocking our energy. And when that happens, well, we're inviting those parasites that bring diseases to drain our blood, and in the energy space, drain, right, our energy. And I've come to look at the soul as the superset, right? The soul is the governing agent that gives, life to consciousness. And again, the Kabbalion has the idea that the all is mind, the universe is mental. And so if the soul is drained, well, then our mental world and our physical world start to break down as a natural consequence. And so understanding how to re-invite flow, and a great way that I like to look at flow, and especially in the case of, say, mosquitoes, is most people really, when mosquitoes are buzzing around, they're flopping their hands around, they're really trying to get rid of them. The problem with that is mosquitoes are attracted to us for 2 main reasons, and that's odor and carbon dioxide. If we're flopping our hands around, it gets our heart rate going, which then has us breathing faster, which then causes the problem to be even worse. And Carl Jung has this idea that that which we resist persists. And I'm a big fan of the Tao Te Ching, which talks about if you give evil nothing to oppose, it'll go away on its own. Not because it's not there, but because you can step out of its way. By understanding how to tap into ourselves and teaching people how to tap into themselves, and then inviting that flow, right, starting at the superset, well, then we can take that flow of, say, like a raging river that then goes through and picks up a stagnant pond, and then it just, takes it downstream and purifies it. And that's a great way to step out of the way of evil, right, and allow it to be taken care of itself.
Well, to me it does, because I've been doing this work a long time. I wonder, because your rate of speech is so quick and there's so much in what you're saying.
Mm.
I think for the audience, I want to slow it down and say, so how did you learn to quiet the noise? You were talking about the, signal
Yeah.
analysis, and what are some of the things you've used on a practical level to quiet the noise?
Well, find find awe, find awe in your life, find beauty, find, maybe that's nature, right? I live in Utah, right? There's very few more beautiful states. So I go up in the mountains a lot, but meditating, I don't know that there's anything better to quiet the noise than meditating. And a lot of people might try and be like, well, as soon as I try, then my mind makes me feel like I'm doing it wrong. But that most likely is a good sign. It's a good sign that you probably are doing it right, because the mind is so good at thinking that when we try to relax it, well, it thinks, hey, there's something wrong. What's going on? This is out of the familiar zone, and that's okay, right? And getting out of the familiar is how we grow. And but I would say starting with meditation would probably be the number one best thing that we can do to be able to tap into, hey, who we are. Hey, what do I want out of life? What is it that I'm saying? What is it that I want to do? Rather than just listen to other people. And I used to rage inside of myself, when I was a soldier, growing up, because I didn't listen to myself. So everyone else would tell me what I should do, but I felt like was wrong. But again, I learned not to trust myself. And I think meditation is a great way to quiet the noise, increase the signal, and learn how to start trusting, our sense of intuition.
Do you run into people? Now, you mentioned that you had childhood difficulties and family trauma, and then trauma in war zones. Do you run into people who've got history of trauma who say, I can't meditate, or if I meditate, it gets worse?
Mm. I don't know. So I've run into people for sure that say I can't meditate. And so the first thing that we need to learn is that, this is, ancient Chinese wisdom up to, Henry Ford, right? If you say that you can or you can't, you're right. And, I think there's this idea that, if I recall, Bruce Lee, my word's not his, but would say some approximation of, be careful how you talk to yourself because your body can't help but to listen. And so if we tell ourselves that we can't do something, well, then we're going to prove, right, that we can't. And so a good way to, look at the world, again, create models, is that we can either be effective or we can be right, right? We can be right about why we can't achieve the results that we want, or we can actually be effective in achieving those results. And when it comes to PTSD, right, people may not feel very safe inside their heads, right? They may not feel safe, so a good thing to do is to, for me, as I'm talking to people and doing a discovery call and helping build some clarity, what is it that makes you feel safe? How do you feel safe? Do you need to have your back against a wall? Right? Let's start structuring things, in a way in which helps make sure that you can actually start breathing and you're not going into panic mode. And then slowly, ever so slowly, right? Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot as well. Somebody who is afraid of elevators, for instance, we have them look at pictures of elevators. And then they realize, hey, they're not going to die. And you go up to an elevator. You don't actually have to go in yet, but you go up and look at an elevator. You see it open, you see it close, you see people come out, you see people come in. They realize, okay, well, I didn't die. Oh my gosh, look at that. And so incrementally, pushing the boundaries of the unfamiliar in order to grow. That's a great way to really start seizing the power from within, I think.
So if you get somebody who's had trauma and they start doing the meditation work and they feel some benefit and they're starting to get things quiet down, what are some of the other tools in this tool set you refer to change the programming, or the what you call, the thought viruses, etc.?
Sure. Well, I've kind of broken it down to what I call my Qing method, as in Tao Te Ching. And first off is, clarity and concentration. Most people have no idea what it is that they want. They have every idea of what it is that they don't want. I don't want to be in pain. I just don't want to have a bad day. I just don't want the boss to come in and, yell at me today. I just can't handle it today. And we can't help but move in the direction of our focus, like a NASCAR driver. If a NASCAR driver doesn't want to crash into the wall, guess what he doesn't look at? He doesn't look at the wall. He looks at exactly where he wants to go. And so first, let's get clarity on what it is that you want. Most people probably haven't spent a whole lot of time, finding out again what they want, because they've probably been listening to other people. So that's a big part of it. And again, the idea of as above, so below, as below, so above. Well, let's get healthy in our body, mind, and spirit. But so often people who, are, traumatized don't really treat their bodies very well, right? They just throw a bunch of, gross food down the hatch, just, looking at it as, just fuel to burn. But if we don't put the right fuel in our car, well, our car is not going to go anywhere, right? Put diesel in a unleaded, engine. Well, that's not going to work, right? Or in regular gas, or JP8 and JP4, right? If you're familiar with military. And so understanding, having the right nutrients, having the right, food is also a way to show self-love, right? Having food, and the right food is just food that's good for you. And I think Sadhguru, who I'm a big fan of, talks about how, if you, chew your food, what do you say? I think 26 times, it starts to inform the cells within your body. And then you can, eventually, if you do that every day, every time you eat, for about 30 days, well, you're going to start to intuit which foods are good for you. You're going to start to intuit which foods are going to help make the body more healthy. And the body's healthy, well, it allows for the mind to get the nutrients that it needs. It allows the mind to get the calories that it needs. It allows, and if we're sharing love with our body, well, again, as below, so above. Well, then we can actually start sharing love with our mind. If we're sharing love with ourselves, well, chances are we're just going to start, by just the way that we present ourselves, by the way that we live, we're going to start cleaning up our space a little bit more, right? Clutter is a huge thing that blocks a lot of people's flow. And so starting to love ourselves means that we start to love the space that we're in, the space that we bring. And as we start showing that love and cleaning up, then we'll find that much more flow is being attracted in our lives. But then also, if there's clutter around, our minds can't help but be focused on it. If our minds are focused on it, well, then they're not focusing on what's best for us. And so, there's a whole lot of tools that I could go through the whole rundown of all 5, but really it's a matter of, again, really helping people find, what is it that I want? How do I align to that? Let's build some powerful meditations. And it's not just that I send you on a meditation and then you do it yourself. Right, do guided meditations actually help people, but then also there's a lot of energy work too, right? Because again, if the soul is being drained, well, what I do is I help heal the soul. So in that way, if the soul is being drained and the body and the mind break down as a natural consequence, well, if the soul's at full power, well, then the body and the mind are then rejuvenated as a natural consequence.
Okay, so what's the structure, the format with which you work with people? How do people work with you? Let's say that somebody listens to this and they say, that I want to connect with this guy. I want him to work with me. And he says he's got 5 tools. I want to learn those tools. How do you make yourself available to people? How do they reach you and work with you? Do you do group work? Do you do online? Is it all in person? What's the structure of how you work with people?
Great questions, and thank you for that. And so they can reach me, anyone can reach me at my website, freemefrompains.com. I'm also, by the time that this airs, my digital summit will most likely be over, but I'm starting a digital summit, as we record now on June 6th. And I've, interviewed 19 different experts from around the world to also help people see, again, models of the world. So in that way, they can hear what I have to say, they can hear what other people have to say, and then start to create this amalgam of what works for them, right? What model best works for them. But on my website, at freemefrompains.com, there, you can book a healing plan. And the healing plan, what we can do is we can go through and build that clarity. Hey, what's going on? What is it that you want? Let's start, assessing the variables and building a healing plan. And even if it's not right for us to work together, I can nearly guarantee I can start pointing people to resources that can actually help them on their journey. And so that way, worst case scenario, Somebody comes in, we have a short conversation, and they walk away with some great clarity. Best case scenario, somebody walks in, we work together, and they, they're healed beyond anything that they thought was possible, because so often we limit ourselves to logical paradigms, and we don't actually allow ourselves to experience the world. And what I mean by that is, as I understand, Niels Bohr had a letter written to him by his son. His son was, very confused. And, Niels is somebody who, was, a big, founding, scientist of the, Manhattan Project, worked in, quantum science, had, daily conversations with Einstein. And he told his son, you're not thinking, you're only being logical, right? And logic serves a purpose, right? It's our, left side of our brain, right? It's very logical, but we've got a whole other part of our brain. And Einstein mentioned how, imagination is actually the true mark of intellect, right? Because the brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality. And so, as we work together, it's really allowing people the permission, helping people find the permission to be able to imagine the world that they want. Because if they are fully immersing themselves in that, well, guess what? Their brain's going to start creating those neural pathways and those neural connections. And any physicist, will confirm that the mind attracts which it dwells upon.
So clearly, we've had a lot of similar source material, you and I, and the people we've found useful, anywhere from great physicists who are also philosophers and psychologists to Sadhguru and people like that. If you were to think about what was like a core or a series, a group of core things that allowed you to turn from whatever path you were on that wasn't so productive, from the childhood traumas, etc., to this path of healing and growth, what would you say that core constellation of factors is? For
Oh,
you?
well, I was very hard-headed, man. And I was super hard-headed. And so I was, leading up to the pandemic, for years, I was very much involved in politics because, again, I wanted to help. The problem is I wanted to help in the way in which, I decided help was needed. But again, what was I saying? That I wasn't listening to myself, I was listening to everyone else. So now I'm taking some approximation of other people's noise, and I'm trying to say, oh, this is the right way to do it. And so never mind that my house is on fire, I'm going to come fix your house, which is like the biggest folly there is. And so the more I threw myself into politics and the more I got involved, I mean, certainly did some awesome things, right? I was a big fan of Bernie Sanders, maybe a little disappointed about him now, but that's another story. But there were things like, phone banking opportunities where we'd have a phone banking for Bernie Sanders. About 5 people would show up. So a friend of mine asked me to try and motivate some people. So I made 2 days worth of calls, and the next day 25 people showed up. And so there was some magic there that I had. I just but that was when I allowed myself to tap into and listen to myself. But most often I wasn't listening to myself. So since I was so hard-headed, I had to have my world kind of collapse on me. I was married, had a son, I have a son that, I love deeply, and realized that, my wife and I really brought out the worst in each other. And we're both good people though, right? Just because we don't get along, it's so easy to moralize. Well, you don't like me? Well, you must be a bad person, right? I mean, this is, and it may not be those words that people say, but it's kind of the play that we enact in our lives. And so I decided that I was going to separate, bought a house, just so we could be good parents, right? We don't need to live together because that's not working out so well, and we can actually be good parents. So I did that. I moved above a very violent and outrageously loud neighbor who would shake my floor daily. My floor would shake about 80 decibels. I even got a decibel meter to show the police. Police refused to do anything. And nothing we can do. And so I'm a combat veteran, dealing with my floor shaking constantly. So much chaos. And so it really started breaking me down. And when it started breaking me down, I didn't really know what to do. I had so much chaos again in my life. Hey, who do I know? What are some reference points in my life? As I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality, of how I can start, making some order from the chaos. And, Jocko Willink. And, I learned of Jocko from Joe Rogan. And as listening to Jocko Willink, well, then Jordan Peterson later on showed up. And then, Jordan Peterson started talking about how he's, doing this biblical series of secularizing the Bible. And I started listening to that. It's like, oh, again, I've been listening to what other people have been telling me, like, oh, well, look at these, silly Christians that they have this book that they, can only take literally, and look how silly they are. And, look how much better I am because I can recognize their silly ideas. But then when Jordan was secularizing the Bible, I let all that go and immediately saw the wisdom there. It's like, oh, these are oral traditions that have been passing down wisdom from the ages, and they're just now able to write this down. Oh, so I've been the moron this whole time. And that allowed me to again start asking, like, hey, is there room for God in my life? And when I started doing that, again, Jordan mentioned to create the highest ideal of goodness that we can conceive of, and then become it, and become worthy of it by becoming it. And I built that all around Gandalf. I also
all around what?
Gandalf, from Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And with Gandalf, right? What was it that Gandalf saw that nobody else saw? Well, he saw what saved the world, right? Nobody saw any value in the hobbits. They thought a bunch of worthless country bumpkins. We don't need them. They're not building castles, right? They're not building the next model of the cart and buggy. They're not horse and buggy rather. They're not really contributing to modern society in the way that we'd expect. And yet, what Gandalf realized is that what holds great evil at bay is the act of kindness from one, small act of kindness from one person to another, on a multitude, and ultimately what saved the world was the fact that the hobbits were, in some way inoculated against the great evil of Sauron. And in fact, Sam was immune to it. And Frodo was just resilient to it. And without Gandalf seeing that, well, the world would have burned. And so that's the person that I wanted to become. But so often we create these governing beliefs. Hey, I believe in God, or I believe in Allah, or I believe in Krishna, or I believe in. But that idea is again given to us. It is given to us from people that we respect that say, hey, this is the idea that I have written from this book. But most people don't really take the time to examine and then orchestrate, right? Write out exactly, finally, what does this mean to me? And what, everything trickles down from our governing beliefs, right? Tony Robbins has this idea that the most powerful force in the human psyche is the need to be consistent with our identity. And there's nothing, more identifying than our governing beliefs. But most people's governing beliefs have been given to them rather than crafted by them.
So you're in the middle, or you're somewhere in the process of answering my question about these core factors that helped you move from a path that wasn't useful to you to one in which you were healing and then you're helping others heal. And so your primary factor, you said, was you're so hard-headed. And then another factor was that you really hit a place where you felt like you were at rock bottom.
Yeah.
And then another set of factors was that you heard some people who've been thinking for themselves or re-investigating kind of source material of people that they liked. So you go back to somebody who looks at any kind of scripture, but they don't just read it the way it was taught to them. They go back and they find out, so who wrote this scripture and what was the context in that culture, and was it meant to be literal, or are there some other gifts hidden in it at the level of a figurative meaning or a parable or multiple levels of meaning. So as you distill that, what was the next series of steps for you to go from rock bottom and living your life from trauma to living into healing and growth?
So when I started asking those questions, right, is there room for God in my life? And I eventually got a vision pumped in my head of a podium. And living here in Utah, I just knew, I saw the podium. I just knew the meaning was that I was supposed to be on the business end of that podium speaking to people. The problem is that, I kind of identified with atheism and at best agnosticism. And so how is this, this guy who doesn't believe in, certainly not the LDS dogma and certainly not the, prophet, right, Joseph Smith. And I'm just going to show up and like, hey guys, I got a vision that says that I should be talking to you guys. And so what I did is I started querying my friends who grew up in the Mormon tradition, come to find out, oh, well, look at that. Isn't that interesting? Something I didn't know, but a higher source of truth, maybe the Jungian collective unconsciousness, maybe it was pumped in directly from source. But the first Sunday of every month at the LDS churches is what they call the fast and testimonial meeting, which means anybody who shows up can go up and share their thoughts. So I showed up, and what happened was, at this point, I'm creating again my greatest ideal of goodness, which I can conceive. But it's kind of a nebulous form. I don't quite have it, quite Gandalf yet. But as I'm interacting with people of faith, I'm starting to see that, oh, even if again, I might find that what they say, could easily be construed as silly, right? Multiple people will stand up and go say some approximation of the same thing. Brothers and sisters, I know in my heart that Joseph Smith is the one true prophet of God. And I know in my heart that the Book of Mormon is the one true word of God. And rather than judge them for that, I started thinking to myself, hey, if this is their highest ideal of goodness, what is my highest ideal of goodness? And then by the third time of me showing up to speak to them, I actually created that out. So the benefit that I got by showing up was allowing me to no longer judge them. And then I started to realize that, oh, well, the wisdom of Jesus saying, judge not lest ye be judged, is not like, because if you judge me or if I judge you, like, who cares? Like, I mean, really, am I going to limit your quality of life? Am I going to prevent you from being able to put food on your table if I judge you? Well, the real wisdom there is that judge not lest ye be judged by the very judgments you are casting upon others. And, as I'm going through this path, I found a great mentor that, told me this wonderful line that nobody can rise above the level of their own self-opinion. And if we're judging ourselves in the guise of, judging others, when we can't rise above the level of our own self-opinion, well, it allowed me to let go of a lot of that hard-headedness, allowed me to let go of that need to control the world, that need to say, hey, this is how the world is supposed to be. Because most anxiety, right, most stress comes from the idea that the world is not matching my internal, internal vision of what I think it should be. And so as I started doing that, again, this path just opened up because, questions are the steering wheel of the mind. So as I'm asking questions, hey, is there room for God in my life? Hey, what is the highest level of goodness of which I can conceive? Well, then mentors just started popping into my life in order to be like, okay, well, let's teach you a little bit more about consciousness. Let's teach you more about physics. Let's teach you more about neuroscience. Let's teach you more about heart-mind connection, which then led me to the great master who taught me how to heal. And because I was ready for it. Because had I met him even a year ago, you're a healer, huh? Right? I would have been, scoffing, certainly wouldn't have been able to take him seriously. But by that point, I realized, oh, again, something that Sadhguru taught me through his inner engineering book, life is about experience, isn't it? Because without experience, well, again, we're just being logical. We're not thinking. So often in my life, I was like that child with his arms folded saying, no, I don't like it. Just like I don't like those vegetables. I've never even tried. I don't like this idea that I've never even thought about, or I've never even tested to see if there's any sort of merit. I just don't like it. And, I gave up childish ways to, grow into a man.
And so if I heard you correctly, you said that within the past year or so, you were introduced to someone you consider to be the great master who taught you to heal.
Yes. So, Ed Stracher. Ed Stracher, he fascinating guy. I never would have been prepared to, because I spend a lot of time mentoring people. I spend a lot of time in philosophy. I've been reading philosophy since, I was a teenager. I've been helping people with, greater wisdom, for a long time. And certainly there's healing there. Certainly there's a way for me to start to let go of my own trauma and help others as well. but not in the soul enriching sense. And that was the biggest puzzle, that piece that I was missing. That just was that eureka. Oh my God. Look, oh my God, this is real. Holy cow. And that really sent me on this path of, not only was it real, but this is exactly what I was looking for. This missing piece that I can now go and herald into the world. And like immediately started working with people just to prove to myself,
And
hey, is
this
this real?
and
Yeah, go
this
ahead.
piece that you're referring to is this soul enriching piece.
Yeah, the soul enriching, just the idea that that one, the soul is real. Two, that the soul is being drained, right, by lack of flow, the parasites, the mosquitoes that are coming in. Some people might, depending on what model of the world they have, maybe they'll call them demons, right? Maybe they'll call them, people say, oh my gosh, it feels like I'm cursed with this bad luck. Oh my gosh, I'm so cursed, right? But people might speak in that manner, right? Maybe they feel like there's a dark cloud, above them. And understanding how energy actually works, that was the biggest missing piece that I had. And I found it through exploration within myself, that then allowed me, that since I've navigated this mountain path, or I've navigated this forest path, well, now I can take others through that as well. And at first, when I was first learning how to train, and what's fascinating is that working with Ed, within an hour of him showing us that, hey, who wants to learn how to, or who wants to do this for real? It's like, I only went through like an hour. Like I went through all this stuff to heal myself, but now like you teaching me. And then it's like, well, sure, man, I'm kind of afraid, because I don't really, a little uncertain. But a lady who I was working with, I was even more unsettled because, I do things through Zoom. She didn't even have her camera on, so I couldn't tell if she's being compliant. I'm used to people, sitting up, and so I can see them. She was laying down, which again is something that I wasn't used to, and I'm brand new at this. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to believe. I'm going to go through, and I'm going to give her, the goodness that I've got. And she came to me with libido problems, and wanted help with getting her libido, to normal functioning levels. And I took her through a very brief, I don't know, 5, maybe 7 minutes. And she said afterwards that she could literally feel something flicking her ovaries, almost as if the ovaries were blocked and something was flicking them, kind of getting the blocks, out of there. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. So now I'm getting real world input that this is something that other people are experiencing simply by me going through these deep meditations with them.
And so the way, from my mind, that so much of that fits together is, this is not something you figured out. This is not something the great and powerful Joshua Cameron intellectually went through the steps to reinvent the wheel. This is just something you're allowing to flow through you, and you're exploring with the people that you're working with.
Yes. Well, and there's this idea that made a lot of sense when I started working with my great mentor, Peter Sage. And he said, look, the best of our abilities have brought us to where we are today, which is why we need mentors, right? Mentors are people that can give us advice, right? And so many people mistake advice from opinion. Advice is somebody who is at a place that you want to be, that can give you meaningful, direction in order to get there. And opinion is everything else. And for so long, I was listening to opinion, which is again that noise. And I learned to distinguish between opinion and advice. And you're right, I didn't learn this on my own. I certainly played with it, and I created, and I made it my own. Right, I learned how to create my own map based upon what I was taught. But yeah, there's nothing, there's nothing special about me except for my faith.
Well, I like to, for myself, it's a useful distinction to make between someone who's a coach and someone who's a mentor. A coach or a teacher, I put those in the same kind of category. And so they've learned things from sometimes their own personal experience, but a lot of it from other teachers. And so they're reading books and they're teaching procedures, and maybe the coach might be analyzing my swing or my stance or this, that, and the other thing. And that's, in my mind, different from the mentor, who is someone who's actually reached the accomplishment level in whatever specific field that I want to make a level of accomplishment. And so they've actually been through. Now, they can't tell me exactly how to get there, but they can tell me what the path is like. What was it like for them to actually reach the same kind of destination? And my path may be different, but at least they're, they've been through it at a certain level, whether that is building a business or reaching a certain level of proficiency in sport or having a marriage that's, really enriching and enlivening for both. That would be the difference for me between a coach and a mentor, or a therapist and a mentor. Because a lot of people who are doing therapy are trying to teach people the best thing they've learned about how to live a healthy, loving, respectful life full of, nurturing relationships and a healthy lifestyle. And if we honestly take a look at our lives as therapists, we find there's very little balance. We're not exactly walking the walk, but we can talk about it beautifully sometimes. And so the mentor would be the person who's actually has constructed their life in a way that resembles, the kind of results that they're actually getting that I want.
Yes. Well, and that's because, as you mentioned with, with, psychology or, psychotherapy, well, that's based on theory, right? Like you said, there's so much imbalance, and a lot of therapists, and many therapists have, a lot of darkness in their lives and a lot of chaos and disorder. And the thing is that theory doesn't cover the price of admission to higher levels of consciousness. Only experience can do that, right? And if you look at it as, say, Abrahamic, right? And in the Bible, right? Abraham was called, right? And again, it's more meaningful to look at that as a metaphor than it is to necessarily look at it as a as literal text. But Abraham got called, and then there was a war, there was a famine. I bet if you asked him, hey, do you think you could handle the stress of war and famine? Well, no. Okay, well, let's get you to a place where you can experience life, because most often our goals, we're the goals that we want, whether it's healing, whether it's to have abundance in our lives, our goals are often looked at as the pursuit of happiness, which is like, hey, I'll be happy once I reach that goal. I'll be happy once I reach that next accomplishment. And the problem is that we show up to that accomplishment as the same person. And if that person before wasn't happy, what makes us think that that person now is going to be happy? Right.
Yeah. And one of my favorite teachers is Guy Finley. And he says, I hear all this stuff about manifesting. He says, I'll give you something to manifest that's really, really useful. He says, find a way to manifest being happy with whatever you have in this moment.
Yeah.
Right. So you go in here first, you realize you're the one that creates your sense of satisfaction, contentment, or dissatisfaction, or happiness, or misery. And once you understand how you're doing that, and as you're talking about, if someone gives you the tools and you have the perseverance to start actually applying them in your life, then you will have manifested something of great value. That is that pearl of great price that they speak of in the scriptures.
Well, and then it comes to, who do I need to become to manifest my goals into the world? And if we look at the world, if we look at it that way, well, then we realize, oh, it's all about the journey. It's not about the destination. And again, questions are the steering wheel of the mind, which then steer us onto a path. And if we steer onto a path and then we start walking it, we'll become a different type of person. And that's what's most important, because, I've got a few tattoos around my body, and one of them is it's the Joker and Batman. They're sharing a back, so they're back to back, and the Joker's face looks very toxic, kind of this bluish skin. And this idea is, again, beware the pursuit of happiness, because in the pursuit of happiness, where you can only be happy after that next accomplishment or after you climb that next hill, well, then madness often masquerades as happiness. And usually the only way to be to be a good person in that world is to be stoic and miserable, which is Batman. And that's not a world that I want to live in. So it's a warning that if we aren't happy, from, within, like you just said. Well, if the universe is mental, right? If everything is consciousness, well, then that suggests to me that what I see in the outer world is a reflection of my inner world. And if I command my inner world through love, through acceptance of myself, well, then the only thing the outer world can reflect is love and acceptance. And it might challenge me, right? Because, life is about choosing love over fear in ever more difficult circumstances.
To wrap this up, because I have this hard stop I mentioned in the beginning,
Yep.
Let's just give people, once again, if they want to work with you or learn a little bit more from you, the website that you prefer they use is
freemefrompains.com, and they can go ahead and just book a healing plan right there. It's free, no hassle, no pressure. Really, let's just talk about clarity. Let's figure out some clarity and start aligning with what it is that you want. And if nothing else, knowing what it is that you want and asking better questions can transform your life.
So freemefrompains.com.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Josh. I really appreciate your taking time to share your journey with our audience. And I wish you all the best.
Yeah. Hey, Timothy, I really appreciate your time. Again, I really appreciate you holding the space here. And it's been a great conversation, and may love and truth always guide your path.
Blessings. Joshua Cameron is an elite master healer who has learned to heal his own childhood trauma, as well as his post-traumatic stress disorder from his times at war. Joshua has a unique way of combining ancient wisdom with modern science and philosophy to make spirituality digestible and understandable.
You've been listening to the On Your Mind podcast, offered by Journey's Dream, where we support people through mental health challenges to a place of true and lasting well-being. If you love our show, we invite you to visit onyourmindpodcast.org to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our helpful resources. Thank you for listening.